Hello, everybody. Today we're going to discuss what is an empire. And so, if you were to take a look in your textbook glossary or the dictionary and look up the term empire, you would probably find a definition that went something like this. An empire is a state that unites many territories and diverse peoples under one ruler or a government. So, essentially, an empire is a state that dominates or rules over another state, or perhaps a series of other states. Now, before we go any further in our exploration of what is an empire, I think it's important to define a couple of terms. And the first term that we're going to define is state. Now, it's easy to get confused when we hear the term state. We might think of like the state of Maine, the state of New Hampshire, the state of Massachusetts, but in this instance, we're actually looking at something that resembles a country. So, just remember, when you hear the term state being used, we're looking at something that resembles a country. Okay, two other terms that I want to define before we continue on. And the first one is core state. Now, core state is going to be used to describe the big state, the main state that is going to be the core of the empire. So it's the aggressor, the one that goes out there and then rules over other states. Now, those other states that the core state looks at or rules over are going to be referred to as periphery state. And so they often are on the edge of the empire, the periphery. Okay. So when we look at empires and core states versus periphery states, what we're going to find is that the core state usually has control over the periphery states through military action, military control. But that's not the only way that a core state can control a periphery state. Another way that they can control those other states is through economic means. And whether that means just expanded economic opportunities or the forcing those periphery states to use the same economic system. And finally, another way in which we see the core state exhibit control and rule over periphery states might be culturally. Now, controlling those states culturally is not a determinant of an empire. And in fact, sometimes what happens is that the core state will take on the culture of the periphery state. And that was the case with the Mongols, right? So when they invaded China, they actually took on the culture, the Chinese culture, as opposed to the other way around. And finally, we're going to look at what reasons an empire has for expansion, right? So a core state might decide to expand and become an empire because its neighbors are fighting all the time, right? And they don't like the inconsistency of warring nations around them. So they may do that and then through their military might have peace. Another way or reason why a core state might want to become an empire and expand is to exploit the periphery states economically. And so to gain in regards to money and finances. Sometimes an empire will expand simply for the glory of conquest, and this can be military might, like Alexander the Great. It might be the glory of spreading your faith and your religion as well. And one last note, when we look at a core state ruling over a periphery state, we can take and estimate or guess, make a conjecture about how long this new empire will last based on whether or not the periphery state decides to resist that rule by the core state. And if they do that, usually the empire is short-lived. On the flip side, if the periphery state decides to collaborate with the core state, and they like this idea of the empire, because oftentimes an empire will expand in those periphery states, the life of those citizens living in the periphery states actually becomes better. And if that's the case, and they collaborate with the empire, the core state, then that's a recipe for an empire that will last a very, very long time. Okay, so that's our discussion about empires.